Well, Marcus, thank you so much for joining us on High Performance. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you and to welcome you. Let's start with that question then. In your mind, what is high performance?
There's only one word I can use for that. That's dad. My dad. A man that set a pace of work and a work ethic and a mindset that I've not quite ever seen in anyone else that I've ever met. My old man's still alive. He used to smoke 40 fags a day, drink gallons and gallons of tea, but he had a work ethic like no one else I'd ever worked with before. And it was his precision of that question of high performance. High performance, I think, can come in many different ways. It's how you see high performance. What is high performance? For me, where I come from, the Northwest, high performance was how good and how hard can you work at whatever it is that you do. And the time I spent with him, that influence from the age of 11, when I finished school at 3:30 and I was in the warehouse at 3:45, and I was there every weekend and every holiday, spending time with my dad, because my dad was a workaholic. So 7 days a week he was at that warehouse, 16, 17, 18-hour days. Sunday was a 12-hour day where he did his bookkeeping, and that was my dad's half day. So that for me is what high performance was all about, my dad.
And that's an interesting answer, because we've had people sit where you are now and talk about the fact that their parents were workaholics in a negative sense rather than a positive sense. But it seems like you don't hold a bitterness that you didn't go to the football with your dad or take the dog for a walk or go on 3-week family holidays or whatever. Yeah. You hold a real gratitude for the fact that he put a work ethic into you that's carried you.
I wouldn't be sitting here today if that wasn't there. And so what people think you miss out on is only what they think you miss out on. I missed out on nothing. Now, I saw a very powerful, strong man with very basic thinking of life that set me up for life. And so I look back with gratitude and respect. What I won't do necessarily is follow in his footsteps in some of the things that he missed out on. And the one key thing that he missed out on was that when he eventually retired, because his business collapsed, and that was a good note, because I think that's probably what saved his life, because he couldn't stop, his children had all grown up and left, and he hadn't spent any time with them. So in the life that I've lived, I've spent time with my children, and I wanted to get married when I felt it was right for me personally, and I wanted to have children because it felt right that I could do something with them and look after them and have a job that was secure and that allowed me to bring them into the world and give them what I believed was, a good upbringing. And I've done that, and I'm still doing that today. So, but I played a very clever role, or how I look at it as a clever role, of how when they came into my life, how I worked around what my wife and my children's expectations were, and the way I live. And there was one thing that I said to my girlfriend, fiance, wife, that's the same person, and that is never, ever, ever ask me to be anything else apart from chef. I'm a chef through and through. If you cut me in half, it'd say cook.
So what was your dad's business then, Marcus?
My dad was a fruit and spud man. He bought fruit and potatoes in the Northwest, Liverpool, Preston, all through the Sefton area. He brought them back to a warehouse, all through the farms in Southport, and he brought them in. He sold them on to shops, hotels, and restaurants, but mostly school meal services was where he sold his produce to. So he was a wholesaler, and then he distributed it out. But some of the great memories of working there were brilliant. Working with workmen, going on wagons, going to Preston, going to Liverpool Market. There's nowhere quite like Liverpool Market in the 80s and 90s when you really do meet the heart and soul of a city like Liverpool. And that's where you start to see how small the world you live in when you live in a church town, Southport, which is where I'm from, a seaside town. And so that was the first introduction to a big place, big world, big city, and it scared the life out of me. So I used to go back to my dad's warehouse feeling secure and feeling that I was in the right place. And that was my job. I wanted to take over and work for my dad. And there was a big change in one day in my life where, I think around the age of 14, my dad said to me, on the back of a wagon, parked outside the warehouse, we were messing around with some spuds, moving them around, and he said, you're not coming into the business, mate. You need to go and find a new career. And I absolutely couldn't understand why he said that. I said, what do you mean? He said, this business is knackered, it's over. Forget it, you're not coming in. Find something else. There was only one other thing I could do, and I was already doing it, cook. My brother was a chef. He was my biggest mentor alongside my father. I was 7 years my senior, boxer, cook, and I did both of those things side by side. And so the boxing ring for me was a place of being an individual where I didn't need to rely upon anyone. and being the work ethic that I have, I felt myself as I felt that I was an individual everywhere I was, because I just had this mindset of focus on what I was doing, and that for me was, you know, a huge game changer.
Yeah.
And working in kitchens was interesting.
So what did boxing teach you then that you still utilise today?
Don't rely on anyone around you, which is the worst thing you can do when you're supposed to be a leader. Boxing is an individual sport. You rely upon yourself. There's a team around you, but that team around you can't step into those ropes. They're pretty much on the outside. And it's only when you realise in boxing the team is so important that you put around you, the trainer, your family, but the minute you step through that rope, the ropes, it's a different ball game. And that's where you feel alone, you feel scared, you think I'm going to get hit, and you just go at it. You know, I spent most of my youth, or a lot of it, you know, in a boxing ring in Liverpool men's clubs, you know, where the ring is almost touching the roof and that's full of smoke and cigars and a lot of beer being drunk, and loved it. Tough times being brought up to box, but yet you didn't really feel part of the sport. You felt very much at the sideline of it.
And when you ended up in the kitchens, how similar was the mindset to working in those kitchens? Did you have a boxer's mindset of I need to deliver here or I'm going to get knocked out?
Yeah, well, without doubt, being in the kitchen, my first big job was at the age of 18 when I came to London to work at the Savoy. I worked at Scarisbrick Hotel in Southport, Law Street, where my brother was a chef. And it was just full of characters. I mean, proper characters. There's like 7, 8 chefs, and it was just fun. It was a fantastic job for my brother. For me, it was just the beginning of something new. And I got the opportunity to come work in London through a competition I did when I was at Southport Catering College. And that judge who saw me in this competition opened a door to probably the biggest door of my life, which was London, which I couldn't probably... I think at the age of 17, 18 or 16, 17, if you'd asked me to point to London on a map, probably couldn't have done that. But here I am, and there I was. And that was a game changer for me. 120 chefs worked in that kitchen. And I got put into a position of a basic chef. And within a month, I was already promoted to running a section that was way bigger than me. But I could work faster and better than anyone else around me. And that was a bit of some tough years in front of me because of that fact. And that's something I felt it was quite hard to deal with, that, to be really honest with you. And the only way I could deal with it was just to work.
So one of the great things one of the great truisms of boxing is that there's levels, and that some people are just at different levels where you're operating. So when you've come down to London as a chef, how appreciative were you of the different kinds of levels of where you were operating, but where you could potentially get to?
There was no plan. There was no goal of, I want to do this, I want to open a restaurant, I want to do X, Y, Z. I was very basic in my thinking, and it was one job at a time. But the minute I stepped foot into the kitchen I worked in, within the first 2 or 3 days, I'd set a date of when I was going to leave, and then I was going to go on to the next job. I never knew what the next job was. But I set that goal of a year, 2 years, whatever it was, to set myself a light that I had to go and reach.
Where did you learn that from?
I think it was my only way of getting through it. I really found London tough.
Yeah.
I found it really cold, sharp, unfriendly, and dark. And I'd go to work, it was dark. I'd come home, it was dark. No one spoke to you. Sometimes in the kitchen, people wouldn't speak to you. And I didn't like it, because that's not where I'm from. Everyone's, do you want a brew? Do you want this? How you doing? You know, you walk down the street and people would say hello to you. You know, you come to London and no one cares less about you. And I think that was my way of setting a get out of jail card, basically, that if I get to that, I'm out of that jail, and I then go and stupidly jump into another one, which was supposed to be an even tougher kitchen. But every time I felt any point where it was getting really difficult, I knew my dad was at the warehouse at 12 o'clock at night. So I'd get home from the kitchen and I'd pick up the phone on the payphone. He'd call me back and we'd have a chat. And sometimes the key message was, you ain't coming back here, mate. You ain't coming back to Southport. What do you want to come back here for? I won't say what he said because it's too rude and too coarse. But there was no way that man would let me get back on that train and come back to live at Lime Street, because he wouldn't pick me up. Not because my dad felt that you know, he did. His point was, why do you want to come back to Southport when you're working in the best kitchen, one of the best kitchens in the country, if not best hotel in the world? What do you go and work back at Scarisbrick?
And at that point, right, if your dad had said, listen, son, get on the train, come back home, we'll cook you a dinner, maybe it isn't for you, would you have gone?
No, I don't think so. Because then I'd know that I'd given up. I don't think I would have gone. I was scared stiff down here.
Really?
And homesick. But no, there's just something about giving in just doesn't quite appeal to me, even from that young age. And I don't know where that came from. I think that's just, I loved, my brother never has worked or been to the places I've been to, but there's a drive in Brian that, I don't see in many people. And that, just watching him on a bag in a gym, watching him row, on a machine for an hour. He's 58, my brother, and he could put people to shame in the gym. He just doesn't give up. He could do 10 3-minute rounds on a bag with a minute break and then go on the row machine for 45 minutes to an hour, sweat like you wouldn't believe, but he'd get off and say that I'm the fittest 58-year-old you ever meet. And I stands by that, and he was always like that. And I love that about him. So I just fed off that.
Yeah.
They're dynamos. These two people are dynamos for me, and I just feed off them and give me energy.
But if we go back to your dad and his influence, so I get the leading by example that you see in him, grafting all hours. What's the kind of nuggets of advice that he was giving you that gave you that grittiness to get through?
Don't give up. Work hard. Be a good person, and look after your money. Look after yourself. Look after what you're doing. If you're going to work that hard, don't throw it all away. Don't be going down the pub and bevving it up or getting, all the things he used to say. Don't be going out and buying everyone around a drink, see the wages that you've worked so hard. He said, if you want to go out, have a drink and then get out. Go home. Don't waste your time with people who love beer. He always used to say that. Don't be going out socialising and wasting time with nobodies. Surround yourself with shite, you'll become shite. Was one of the things he'd say to you. And that, he's right. And I think I love that about him. He's very direct and very coarse, but I think it's who I am. It's what's inside me. It's what's under my skin.
So you find yourself going into these kitchens then where you're at the lowest level. So to take your dad's lessons that you're at the shite level, how did you identify, I want to get to the next level? Like, did you go and hang around with like chefs that were far ahead of you to go and pick their brains?
No, never. I saw one or two in the kitchen that I'd say, I'm going to get to where you are. And I'd pinpoint a couple of people that I wanted to get to their level before I left that kitchen. And I would identify them as soon as I walked into the kitchen.
And what would you do, though, to learn from them?
Just watch them. Simple as that. Look at them, watch them, make sure they're doing what you like, see what they're all about, take what they've got on the table and add it to your arsenal of information. And so stack it up, get it into make it your own, stick it on a shelf, train, so take that information, that work ethic and stick it on a shelf. And then one day when you become a head chef, you get it all down and then you make your own mark on the industry.
So give us an example of like one of the early characteristics you'd have identified that you
There's only really one person that stands out for me. And that was, so I came to London, I worked at the Savoy. I did just under 2 years, and before the end, I felt like I'd done my time, and I set that day, and I said to Dad, I don't really know where to go next. I said, but there is one kitchen I really remember from a TV show called Take 6 Cooks, and it was about 6 of the greatest chefs in the UK at that particular time, and one of them was Albert Roux at Gavroche. I said, Dad, that's where I want to go. From a 5-star hotel to a 3-star Michelin is like flying from North Pole to South Pole.
Yeah.
Completely different places. Both cold, both got a pole, but both completely different for different reasons. And that's what came next. He said, well, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, I'm off tomorrow. He said, right, I want you to do me a favour. He said, I want you to get up, have a shower, have a shave, put your best suit on if you've got one, get a jacket on, and go and knock on their door. I said, Dad, you can't do that. He said, mate, will you just do that for me? I was like, that's Gavroche, mate. I can't go and knock on the Gavroche door. He said, will you just fucking do it? Do it for me and see what happens next. So I did it. Knocked on the door. Michelle didn't come up. The head chef came up, Mark Prescott, who happened to be from Wigan. So he's a northerner like me. He gave me time. I told him what I wanted. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the post offering me a job.
Wow.
I handed my notice in at the Savoy. Anton Edelman laughed at me and said, you won't survive. And there was the feed. That was just what I needed. There was the the fodder for me to feed off, because that chef said to me, that kitchen's too tough for you and you won't survive in there. So I thought, okay, I've loved working at Savoy, but I'm going anyway, because you don't pass that up. So what was the person I met? I walked in that kitchen on my very first day. I walked to the vegetable section, and there was a French chef there, and Michel introduced himself. He took me over there and said, you're going to be working with this chef. In a week, he's going to be leaving this section. Oh, by the way, he doesn't speak a word of English. He's French. Off you go. Here we go. And I put my head down. I was given the section after a week, and I entered Hell's Kitchen in my mind, and yet it was the most organised, perfect kitchen I'd ever worked in. It's beautiful. But I just took a job that I wasn't ready for, and I survived. That day, I went home. I called my dad. He said, right, lad, what do you think? What was it like? I said, unbelievable. It's clean. It's the service, the food, Michel, Gavroche, mate. Brilliant. I said, but there's one person in that room, in that kitchen, that just stands out from the crowd, who's completely different from anyone else. This particular chef messes around, last one in, first one out. But at 12 o'clock and at 6 o'clock, that particular chef became a cooking machine of pure focus and adrenaline. I said, that chef stands out from the other 23 chefs in the kitchen, even more so than Michel Roux. And he said, people like that, watch them, focus on them, and go with them. And that was Gordon Ramsay. Big change in my life, that, because he was a game changer in that kitchen. And obviously, he became a game changer in my career, because that was the chef that stood out from any other chef I'd ever worked with. Out all the 110 chefs in the Savoy.
And stood out in what way? Were you in awe of him, impressed by him, confused by him? Because you weren't going out and clubbing and partying and dancing and having fun and then cooking. You were Mr. Single-minded determination, right?
I was the opposite to him.
Yeah.
He was that. And Gordon was a people person. And he really had a star quality when it came to the food. He'd just spent 3.5 years with Marco White at Harvey's, the rock and roll kitchen, the kitchen that was unlike no other in anywhere in this country that had ever seen, anyone had ever seen before. And so he came into Gavroche with that training, that tasting, that attention to detail, that perfection on the cutting of the fish, that brilliance of putting food on the plate. Taste, taste, taste. You look around the kitchen, people weren't tasting food, they would just go through a process. And that's the one thing that was a point of difference. So that was when, as I focused on him, I added that into my arsenal. Just kept adding and adding and adding, and just loved it. And mimic it. Because he was mimicking Marco. But Marco I never had the chance to work with Marco. That kitchen I was not ready for. So I went into Gavroche and saw someone who then left and then went to Paris. And strangely enough, we met up 3 years later, and I became the very first chef that he ever employed at the Aubergine.
And before we talk about life at the Aubergine with Gordon Ramsay, there's a great conversation here for people that feel that they're thrown into the deep end all the time, and either self-doubt or imposter syndrome is the old enemy that creeps up and stops them in their tracks. You either didn't have them, or if you did have them, you managed to quell them and keep them quiet.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to people for whom the self-doubt just sometimes can be crippling, and what you did at that period to get through that?
Find someone to lean on. You've got to find someone to talk to. You need to find, but whoever you find, whoever that person is in your life, you make sure that that person is a rock. So that rock that you can't budge, that you can lean on, that can support you. Don't find someone that's like you, or someone that has failed before. Find someone. It could be a teacher, it could be a lecturer, it could be an aunt and uncle, it could be a granny, granddad. Someone in your life, if there is one. If it's not someone that you know, go and find a book.
And who was it for you then? Was it still the phone calls to your
100%.
dad?
Oh yeah. I'd never got through the Aubergine without him.
And how was he so wise for a guy that sold fruit
He
and
had
potatoes?
he had no clue what world I was in. No clue.
But isn't that naivety in some ways is the magic, huh?
That's the magic. That's the key. Basic values of life don't change, no matter how rich, how tall, how high you are, how big you think you are. Basic values still there. It's called foundation. This building we're sitting in right here is built on a foundation. This building could have been 1 story tall or 38 stories tall. It could be even higher. But if the foundation is weak and soft and breakable, this building will collapse. And I think that's the same in us.
Amazing. So you go into Aubergine with Gordon Ramsay. What level did you go into that kitchen at?
Sous chef.
Okay, and how was that experience?
I was not ready for that. I was never ready for any of the jobs that I've just spoke to you about.
So when you went in, can I just ask, did you set yourself a time scale again?
No, this is the one kitchen I had no clue what I was walking into. And I had just stepped into Hell's Kitchen, the best kitchen, that better than Harvey's. It was super. And he was absolutely obsessed with it, possessed with perfection and work and customer service. You know, he was just take food to a whole new level. And I've not been in that position before because it was very, very different to Gavroche. Gavroche was an institution and it was set in its stone. It was set in its way. This was brand spanking new, creative cookery at the highest level that was being recognised globally. That was what made that place very, very different.
But now you're going to have to be quite self-deprecating because you saw him and were impressed. He obviously saw you and was impressed.
We stayed in touch through Gavroche. We worked together for a while, and then through that time, we talk. Every now and again, you may go out and meet some, go out for a bite to eat or something, or not really that much, to be honest with you, because he was always trying to get people out to go and, let's go and catch up after. But there's this unbelievable energy. Gavroche gave us 2 days off a week. Other restaurants I'd ever worked in gave me less than that. And so there was this opportunity to catch up on a Saturday. And so there was sort of a colleague / friend there. So when I went to work at the Aubergine, the friendship became boss and pupil. That was harder than the job itself because I'd seen him laugh. We'd had jokes. I'd been the butt of jokes in the kitchen. And that was like, whoa, he's serious. I'm thinking, am I going into this? I didn't know how he was going to run that kitchen. I had no clue. I knew what a good chef he was, but I didn't realise he was so focused. And not the person I saw at Gavroche. Whole new level. You're talking Championship football versus Champions League.
Yeah.
But it also sounds as well that, to use that football analogy, you've got somebody that's been a colleague in the dressing room that's now your player manager or the guy that's leading it, and that's a very different skill set.
It is.
What were you learning about leading a group of chefs rather than being one of the chefs?
I could have been his brother, Tom and Jerry, whoever you want. I could be anyone. But to him, I was just the sous chef. And I've got a job to do. And you'll follow me and you'll do as you're told. Forget that, everything else. Park it to the side. Leave it on the touchline. Don't bring it onto the pitch. Don't bring it into the kitchen. And that's what I learned. That's what I saw there. I sort of quite like that, though. I did like it. I found it tough. But I get asked often, what on earth possessed anyone to go and work in a place that we were 6 days a week. We were 18-hour days. Because no one forced me to do it. We loved it. We all loved it, the people that got through it. And then I became that person. So I became this same as, in some sense, because then I left and went to Paris. And I went to work at a restaurant called Guy Savoy, which is a 3-star Michelin. And it was probably one of the easiest jobs I've ever had. Couldn't speak a word of French. Why? Was it easy? Because I was trained.
Yeah. And it comes back to that great phrase that, there were things that were hard for you at Aubergine, right? But what's hard for you isn't necessarily bad for you.
No.
Would you say you grew as a person as well as a chef in this period in your life?
When I walked into there, if you'd have read my CV, you'd have said competition winner, college first at everything, won every competition and came top in every single exam, which is not really what I was at school. But in catering college, I did a lot. So I got my head down and I focused. My CV said I was a very good, reliable, hard-working cook and a very good cook, because that's what CVs do, until you step in there. And then you realise that your CV is just a piece of paper with a name and an address on it. And the words on the page are just words. What he wanted to find out was, who are you? What type of chef are you?
So how did he test you?
Every day, lunch, dinner, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, perfection. Get ready, here we go. And then you realise how average a chef you really are. So I was a championship footballer in that kitchen, and I needed to be right at the very top of Champions League.
So
and I
I
wasn't Champions League. No way was I Champions League.
So self-awareness is the first step of doing that. And
I realised
you've had like a pretty stark message. But what were the kind of steps then that you made to get to that Champions League level?
Head down. Just head down. Ride the punches. That's where the boxing comes into the equation. And you go with it. and it was a school of education. Forget what people think it is. Forget what you hear. Forget what the stories. They're just stories. What happened in that kitchen stays in that kitchen, and it is a kitchen of perfection and drive and ambition, and I love that.
But as somebody outside your world, I've almost got this cartoon image of it screaming at each other and effing and blinding. Tell us, what was it like where that education process
The only
was
reason
happening?
why anyone ever raises their voice in a kitchen is because someone is cutting a corner. Simple as that. And if I cut a corner and someone raises their voice at me, then so be it. I deserve it. And you've got to accept it. It's what it is. Do you know what? If I have to reflect back on life and think, where would have been the best place for me? And I'd say it would have probably been in the army, because there is a discipline in my head that I seem to have. And I think I would have, if I'd have been in the army, I would have wanted to be in the paras or in the best, and I'd have strived to get to that. And that's where I look at you've got to have a self-awareness. You have to identify who you are. I've made some massive mistakes in my cooking career. But if I've messed up a service, or I've may have cut a corner, or I've not done things right, whatever it may be, there's only one person you've got to deal with, and that's the man in the mirror. You've got to look at yourself before you can start judging everyone else around you. And that happened to me once, where I had to realise that person has to change.
What happened?
My man management skills were appalling.
Were they?
Yeah, absolutely appalling. I was a voice. I raised my voice. I ran the kitchen as almost as an individual. I was a boxer. I'm from Southport. That's who I was. I was a shy young lad in a world where I needed to communicate. And then I realised that you can't be a one-man band. When I came back from Paris, I was given the keys to a restaurant to run at the age of 25. That was unbelievable. The hardest thing I've ever done. Absolutely incredible. And it was Gordon that brought me back from Paris to open this restaurant.
So the much publicised fallout with Gordon Ramsay that you had, was that at Aubergine, or was that later when he brought you back?
Later on.
That was later on. Because I think, I've seen this spoken about elsewhere in a kind of a salacious way, and we're not really interested in a salacious, you had a row with another famous chef. But I think there is a really interesting story to tell here about the fact that sometimes in life, these things actually can be of value to everybody. Mm. Do you reflect on that period where you had the fallout with him and think, actually, you know what? There was a value for everyone in that.
Best thing that ever happened to both of us.
Why?
Because I wanted to be in his shoes. And you can't be in his shoes, they're too big. And I knew I couldn't fill them. And I think for me, I had another ambition, I had another goal. And so I had to try. I became an individual in a very big company. That company, when that happened, I was part of hundreds of chefs. Yes, I was still the first employee, but I became the whole thing. The company became bigger and bigger and bigger, and I could see that I was a fish in a pond, but I wasn't the biggest fish in the pond. And so you have to identify, where do you want to go, what do you want to do, and I had to change. It's
interesting you say that, because I think that what I've heard from you all the way through this conversation is I didn't have a plan, I didn't really have a route, but I just worked hard. Mm. And it feels like suddenly, with this fallout with Gordon, it suddenly didn't become about the hard work, because if it was, you'd have said, I'll just work hard for the next 5 years, I'll be there. Whereas it was almost like, now I want that. So I wonder whether something changed within you.
One thing.
Ego.
Well, three things changed, or three things that changed it, and it's called Jake, Archie, and Jesse. And while I was having that fallout, they were at home in bed. And so you have to have a plan.
Your children.
Yeah, children. Oh, you have to. You bring anyone into the world, and you start scratching the surface of doing things differently. You have to be very confident that you can continue and give them the security that you want to. And cookery can be you can be one thing one minute and nothing the next. You can be dropped at any given time from a kitchen. So as this company was getting bigger, and I felt like it wasn't about me anymore, it was about big things, I wanted to go back to that being an individual again. And so I had to find a way out to be the individual, and I was becoming one of many, and I didn't like it. Who wants to be one of many?
So this is the first time where you're actually following in your father's footsteps in many ways of becoming a father. So you've gone into a different industry and you've taken his counsel as you're navigating your way through that industry. But now you're a dad like he was to you and your siblings. How much of it was driven by the idea of wanting to be independent, like you'd seen your father doing, to facilitate that fallout?
I think I wouldn't say no one facilitated anything in a fallout. It naturally happened, and it that guy stood next to me on my wedding day. So big player in my life, big player, and I love the guy to pieces. I still do admire him. I think he's a great guy. I watch him on TV. I see what he's done. You know what, guys? The day I met him, I knew where he was going. He was always television, restaurants, the whole thing. That guy Gordon never wanted to. He was always incredibly ambitious, and I love that. But I couldn't do it if I was in the same camp. And so I had to go and find my own road. And so I did that. And I think it's my own family values that drove me to do that, going back to where I started. And sometimes I still do go back to where I started. I still reflect on, where I come from. I love where I come from, but I don't want to go back there.
Do you think maybe you were too similar as well? Too very driven, very single-minded?
Similar, but very different. Yeah. We had some great times, and great memories, and I wouldn't change them for anything. You can change any of them. They're so important.
And I think, there's highs and lows throughout this whole thing. I wonder whether the biggest high was your first Michelin star. Did you feel validated at that point, like the whole journey and all the difficult times were worth it? Or are you the kind of person who straight away wanted a second star? Or
what do you want in life? I want a restaurant. What do you want to do? I want a Michelin star. That's the problem.
Because why is that the problem?
That takes you off from the focus. You're too busy thinking about trophies. Right. You should be thinking about food. That's the difference. I'm not a glory chaser. And the chefs that are constantly chasing glory never ever reach it, in my opinion, because they're too busy distracted. I've seen chefs in my kitchen, head chefs and sous chefs, that just spend time on their phones looking. What about the customer? What about the plate in front of you? And that relationship always ends badly for that particular chef.
Would you have been just as happy with all the focus, all the effort, all the desire that you put in, but not sitting here as a Michelin star chef? Would you feel like you didn't get the recognition that you deserved?
No. I got more recognition than I'd expected. And when I won that Michelin star at 25, I never expected that to happen. So why did it happen? Because of my training. So coming back from Paris and opening a restaurant at L'Orangerie, and 6 months later, I'm given this accolade, and one of the biggest accolades you can get in culinary, in food. I remember the phone call. It was the same day Gordon won 2 stars. So it was a complete double celebration, complete massive celebration. But yet I just felt that the guide had just dumped a huge bag on my shoulder, and I had to go to work with it every day. And that was fine. I dealt with that. But I became very worried about maintaining that at that age. So I became that tough character, that individual again, that I'm running a kitchen and I'm focused on everything. I'm looking under every post-it note now. So I become even more obsessed with perfection. And that's when the voice and my voice was raised, and that's where I became not quite the same person that I entered that kitchen, and I needed to do something about that. And that was, I had to focus on that person, in that mirror, that you need to change, mate, or you're just going to hit a brick wall if you're not careful, a brick wall of just yourself. And so I did that because it was it was outlined to me. Outlined that you need to change your ways, your management skills need to change.
Who by?
Gordon, of all people.
What did he say?
You're destroying yourself. You're destroying yourself. You're destroying your business, my business, his business. And if you're not careful, you'll hit a brick wall, mate. And that was the good thing about Gordon. He'd come over after service, never in service. After he'd finished his service, we'd sit, we'd have a glass of wine or a cup of tea, and we'd go over things. But that conversation could be 20 minutes. Or it could be 2-3 hours. We could be sitting there till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and just having a chat. That was one of the lovely things about Gordon for me, was that he always gave you his time, always. And all he ever wanted you to do was to succeed, because my success was his success at the same time.
So when you had that, did you instigate the fallout that happened, or did he?
No, I don't think it was. I think it was something that just naturally happened, and it's quite hard to explain why I instigated, because, I wasn't dealing with Gordon, I was dealing with the company. It'd become a company then. Gordon was off doing TV. I think he was already working in America at that point on television. So it was never Gordon. This is the whole thing. Everyone thinks it was me and Gordon. It was never me and Gordon. It was me and a company that happened to be owned by him. That was the difference. And that's what I needed to get away from.
But I suppose
corporate
maybe
world,
you were expecting him to step up and be Gordon and come to you and say, look, forget about the company, chef to chef, let's sort this out.
didn't happen.
Would you have liked it to have happened?
I would, yeah. Yeah, at that time, yeah, I would. I probably would have taken that, hands down. Yeah. But I would never go back and change what's happened. Never. Don't want to change anything.
So what did you change about your management style then that you were doing that you changed?
I
this?
stayed the same for years and years and years and years until I stepped into one brand new arena that I think probably changed my life. Even again, my life has changed in many different ways. And that's when I got invited to replace Michel Roux on Masterchef. And walking onto the set of, Masterchef, the lady that brought me onto the show, there's a few things that I learned from it. Was that I wanted to know who was in the firing line, who was going to be up for this job, and every man and chef and woman that wanted to be on television applied for that opportunity. I remember reading the Caterer, our industry magazine. Michel Roux had just had left Masterchef for whatever reason, and I thought to myself right there and then, that's going to be one of the hottest jobs in television in my world, and that everyone's going to apply for it. And I didn't think twice. I didn't even think about applying because I know that I was the outspoken, sweary chef that would never get a look in on that. So I deleted it and thought to myself, that would have been a nice gig, but it's not quite for me. Probably a month or so later, I got a call from one of the producers who said, Marcus, is there any opportunity that I could just come and have a chat to you? And it was I was at the time where I'd just been on my own now for 5 years of running a business on my own, and I was just relaunching my restaurant. I just refurbished it, and I was just about to open the restaurant. So I cleared my diary for 6 months. She said, Karen said, can I come and see you? I said, yeah, but if you're going to come, you have to come this week. She said, I can come now if you want. Come round. She came with David Ambler, the executive producer, and sat down. She said, look, I'm just going to come straight out with this. Would you be happy to replace Michel Roux on MasterChef Professionals? Oh. And I sat there, my face didn't change. Inside, I was like, my God, that's just not what I expected. And you could have knocked me over.
Why did that mean so much to you?
Because it wasn't what me, the chef that I am, and there was the aggression, what people thought about me, read about me. I don't fit MasterChef. That's PC. You have to be correct. She said, you want you to do 2 things for me when you go on set. There's no script. We can't tell you what to do. It is what it is. Smile and don't swear. Those are the only 2 things.
See, but what intrigues me on this, Marcus, is that you're somebody that loves food. You've just said that Michelin star made no real difference because you were focused on the food.
Yeah.
And yet something like MasterChef is then, it's taking you into a world that's not just about the food. It's about image. It's about the fame and all the other things that come from it.
Oh, it's never about fame.
Right. So tell us about that, because it
was about a show that I watched when I was a boy, Lloyd Grossman, the Red Kitchen, the Blue Kitchen, and the Yellow Kitchen. I loved the show. Take 6 Cooks was the other show that was out that time in the 80s. And Michel Roux took the same concept to professional level, and he'd done it for 7 years. So he'd already laid the foundation, and all I needed to do was just step in and be me. But I didn't realise that it would actually come my way. And so what it taught me was to speak differently, because if you're talking to a chef, you're actually not talking to the chef, well, you are, but you're actually you're telling the viewer all about the dish, what it tastes like, why it's good, why it's bad, what are the pros, what are the cons. So as I'm talking to you, the chef, about the dish you just cooked, I'm also telling the viewer as to the reasons to my thinking. And by doing that, I stopped raising my voice. Right. I stopped getting upset because the chef hadn't cooked a great dish, because it's irrelevant to me. There's a great dish, it's a good dish or a bad dish. What I've got in front of me is something that I need to explain, and I need to do it without any bad language. So as I went through that process, and I'd go back after service, I started to become this new person. And so I started to communicate with the chefs in front of me the same way as I did on set, and the response I got from them was unbelievable. And they couldn't quite believe what was happening, that Marcus is smiling in a kitchen. Hey, you must never, ever be afraid to continue learning, and you must never be afraid to change. And if there's something better and you can become better at something, I'll take some of that.
And so do you now regret those years you went through of frowning and shouting and being belligerent and difficult, and people saying to you, "You've got to change, you've got to change, you're gonna burn out"? Do you wish you'd had this epiphany 20 years ago?
No, because I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have got there. I needed that. That was my energy. That was my petrol in my car. That's what drove me. And you know what? Every now and again, that can come back. By the way, it's not gone forever. You know, if I put my chef's jacket on, I've done a TV show, as you know, recently, and I'm in a garden. I'm with farmers, and I'm growing, and I'm doing things that people can't relate to me. Look at me and think, what was he doing? But put a chef's jacket on, and it's like putting it's like putting a uniform on. It's like putting a shirt on a football pitch. It's like putting an army, putting their uniform on and polishing it. It's looking immaculate. So there is a chef in there, but there's also, you know, someone who actually does enjoy the outside life now, because my children have shown me there's a whole new world out there, and I like that. You know, the family are really important to me, and they are showing me new things, meeting people, families, going out, going to the football matches, the rugby matches, and being part of a whole new thing. And I admire the schools that they go to, and I love their education, but I never had it. I left school with nothing. I couldn't tell you what I've got as a qualification. My school doesn't. I left at 15, and I had some CSEs apparently.
I'm sorry, I wanted to ask you about that point you were talking about Masterchef, of educating viewers in terms of the process of cooking and food. And one of my favourite terms is people that are ultra-crepidarians, which means that everyone's got an opinion, people that have an opinion on something they know very little about. Now, you're educating some people that wouldn't be educated, but you're also at the whims of people that have an opinion on food without understanding the process or even wanting to know it. How do you deal with criticism from people like that come into, whether it's your restaurants or see you on TV?
Criticism is important. But when you put 35, 34 years into what I've done, and if you know more than me, I might take on board what you've got to say. But I also realise that everybody's entitled to an opinion, and I will accept that opinion. I have my own view. And so when I'm on MasterChef, I only give my own personal view about how I see something. But I've got a lot of work behind me to back up what I'm saying. So if you can match that, I'm happy to listen. But more often than not, you know, people always sometimes do get things wrong. Television is about, you go home, you sit on your couch and you put the telly on, you listen to what I've got to say or what someone else has got to say. But I'm not sat on my couch. I'm out doing my thing. I think that's the difference. It's easy to criticise from a couch.
Yeah. But what about when they come into your restaurant and like a critic to give you an appraisal? And
that's a whole new ball game.
Go on, tell us about that then.
Well, critics are the same thing, but they write with the general aspect of that it's their opinion, but they're writing on behalf of the nation. Well, they're not. They're writing on behalf of themselves. And if you can remind yourself of that, then whatever's written is just words. And what I love about the world we live in today is that we can now create our own words through social media. So we can talk about our own story. So whatever's written, you can counteract that by good positivity. And that's the key, stay positive. We tend to navigate into always the negativity of everything in life and not focus on the positivity. Food critics were legends at pulling people to pieces. I hate bullies. I've always hated bullies. I used to go around the playground and see bullies, and I always had my say in what I thought of a bully. And I think sometimes when people hide behind a pen, then I don't think that, I just think it's wrong. Say it with respect. Write it with respect.
Yeah.
Give due, bad, good and bad. There's ways of writing things. But sometimes I think critics have gone too far. And I think that social media is taking that away from them now. And that's a good thing.
I'm getting this sort of overwhelming impression that you're in a new phase of your life. You had the phase of the young guy growing up, and then you had those early days in the kitchens where you were learning a lot. Then you were the man in charge, and by your own admission, went too far and made some mistakes.
Yeah.
And now you are on the television, and it sort of feels like we're in a new era now. So, what are your ambitions now? What are your dreams now?
My ambition now is to become a better cook.
Even better.
Yes, better cook. Never stop.
So what do you think you're not good at when it comes to cooking?
I don't know where food comes from. I never talked to suppliers. I never went to see a farmer or a supplier. The only pair of people I ever used to see was going to Preston Liverpool Market or going to the farmers in the northwest. So when I went into kitchens, they were just people at the end of a phone. If I don't like what you bring to my kitchen, I'll send it back, and you can get me some more. So there was a lack of respect there. And I bought a place 4.5 years ago in East Sussex that happened to have a kitchen garden on it and 65 acres of land, and the farmer looked after the cows and the sheep on it. So what I did was I bought the place and didn't realise where I was going to go with it. So it was a second home for me because my children go to school down there in Tonbridge, and I started to uncover this incredible thing that I'd never thought I'd ever have in my life, which is a kitchen garden, 11 beehives and an apple pear orchard that had plum trees in the corner, had grapevines over the other side. It had a pond with ducks on it, and there's a field next door with sheep and cows on. And I started to see a whole new world of my world. I started to see my world in a completely different way, and it excited me. And seeing food from the soil up rather than from the back door of a kitchen up, I saw a whole new opportunity. And do you know what it does? It just puts a smile on my face, because I absolutely love going there. And the minute those gates open and I drive through, London is dumped at the gate and doesn't come through ever.
You know what I would like to learn from you is facing problems head on. Like, I'm a prevaricator. If there's a phone call I don't want to make, or a conversation that's awkward that I don't want to have, or I always imagine it's going to be worse than it is. Yet the way you say, if you bring me something I don't like, I send it back. If you don't deliver some food to the past that I like, it goes back. What advice would you give to people for facing those difficult conversations head on? Because as a chef, you would have had to have them hour by hour.
In the olden days, head on, smash through it. There's a very good friend of mine once, David Nichols, whose son unfortunately had a really bad accident where he broke his neck, and he's been paralysed from the neck down for many years now. And he helped me through some really tough times. And he was across the road at the Mandarin Oriental, and I was over at the Barclay. And I would call him for some guidance and advice. And I don't know why I did. It was when I was going through my tough 3 years at the Gordon's place. And when I knew him through his charity, the Nichols Foundation, which is about research and development of stem cell, trying to get people walking again. I mean, walking when you're paralysed. There's a mountain that would be difficult to climb, but he's doing it. And so Chef, the industry, came together to write cookbooks and raise money and do events. And so I used to go and speak to him. And he said, Marcus, your reputation, everyone knows all about you. You react instantly. He said, can I give you some advice? He said, if you sleep on the problem, I guarantee the next day you'll wake up with a different view. I thought, oh, what a cracking piece of advice. While you're angry, you'll make a decision, but it won't always be the right decision. And I still live by that today. Great piece of advice.
So can you give us an example of where you've applied that and you've seen positive effects from it?
Every day. I get hit with those phone calls. I get hit with those problems. If I think I'm in the right mood, catch me on the wrong day, I have to take that advice, and I have to sleep on it. And so I use it all the time in my day-to-day life. And I've decided that now, moving forward, post-COVID, surrounding myself with a whole group of new people that are not from my old and not from my past, so that they can take me forward, and so that I can move forward in a different zone, trying to drive away from the problem rather than hit the problem head on and deal with it later, but with a completely different view. In my head, everything is very straightforward, but sometimes when you talk about it, it can sound complex and different and detailed. But we're talking of 36 years here, guys. You know, that's a long time. But I'm 51 with 20 more years in front of me.
Yeah.
What am I going to do now?
But even that there, like you're presenting that in a very matter-of-fact way, that I've got people around me and I'm learning new things, and yet you do have 36 years of experience that you fall back on. And that is quite a difficult skill to learn, to embrace new challenges.
I've worked on Masterchef, coming up for my 8th year. I've just done my first series. I'm going to Australia to film for a month to discover food of Australia later on in the year. I want to go and enter into other people's worlds. You know, you may find this quite surprising. You know, there was one person who I used to watch a lot of, and I'm going to get shot for saying this, and I'm a Liverpool fan, was Alex Ferguson.
What was it about him?
Dealing with the best. Hidden problems, he's the boss. And in the 90s, when Liverpool weren't the noughties, I find myself watching Manchester United because they were winners. And they had a manager that was beyond anyone else. And he just made serious decisions. And you'd read the media and you'd hear the way he does things. He's non-compromise with the best talent. What, you sacked Roy Keane because he spoke out? That is quite serious when you see that. And you look at things like that, that's a big decision. But to be the best, you've got to make big decisions. And you've got to make decisions that are unpopular. And that's what I learned by watching people like him.
So someone like Ferguson would have said that his first decision was, does this benefit Manchester United? And if the answer is yes, well, let's make the decision. If it doesn't, we're not making it. What's your criteria then for decision making?
I think back in the olden days, it was about how I benefited. I think now I have to look at the bigger picture of how I can protect where I'm going, which is protect everything I'm now part of. I can't go onto the set of Masterchef effing and jeffing. I can't write a book and write just what I like or write the words I like. It's got to fit in the modern world. It's got to fit in what people are looking for. And so what I've realised is where in the olden days I couldn't give a shit what people thought of me. Now for me to be able to succeed, I have to be very conscious of what people think of me and what people see. And so I've got to become a different person, and I have to change the way I look at what I do and what I say and how I approach things. You don't go through that level of cooking and those hours of 16-hour days, 5-6 days a week, and that's hard to change that concept. It's hard to get out of that mindset. I often find myself speaking sometimes in the third person like that was someone else. It's quite odd, and I get people laugh at me, or people can make a joke about it. But it's only as you reflect on what you've done that you start to realise that you can become more than just what you are and who you are, and you have to think about the long-term future. I don't want to retire. I don't want to stop. I still want to be a high achiever, and I still want to be a high performer in everything that I do. Tales from a Kitchen Garden, the show that I made, was a show that took me into people's back gardens and to meet from some fantastic farmers who are unsung heroes of my industry. And all I ever wanted to do was shine some light on these beautiful people and what they produce, because they're all small artisan suppliers. Walking into Masterchef and finding the next generation of chefs and finding unsung talent, unsung heroes, is quite special. And the reason why I say that about Masterchef is because the 30-odd chefs or 48 that used to walk on set, they're not the future. They're lost, a little bit lost in some sense, is that they're not sure who they are. They don't know whether they're good, they're bad. Their bosses may not say whether they can good cooks. They're not getting trained. But someone enters them into a competition to see, who am I? And they come on set scared stiff, and our job is to carry them through the journey of MasterChef. So 48 chefs walk on set. We all know there's one trophy. What about the other 37? The key is to make sure that those 37 go home feeling what an amazing experience. I didn't win, and I learned some things about myself, and I've got things to change and to build on. That's a good thing. And that's what I love about MasterChef, is that you find that next. There's a jewel in there. That jewel will never come out unless it went through that story, went through that journey, the journey that I've been on in many different areas. And that's what I love, the fact that we step on set and 3 months later, we've got some different people at the end.
Brilliant.
It's absolutely extraordinary.
So when you're recognising these talents that are coming on MasterChef, or you're going into the different environments, how much of what you're looking at is down to their actually culinary skills, and how much of it is down to mindset and coachability and attitude? If you had to give a proportion.
Well, my job in there is I'm a link in a chain, and I've got a job to do. I don't teach them how to cook on MasterChef. What I'm giving them is culinary advice. And to succeed on MasterChef, listen to the judges. It's on the foot. You're getting educated on the go. We are telling you the rights and wrongs of your dishes. If you take that information and absorb that and move that on to, if you get through to your next dish, if you start to build on that, we're actually educating you as you go along. But it happens to be a fast track journey, and it's only the ones that take the criticism and build on it that succeed. It's the ones that can't take it, guaranteed, will not continue in the competition because it's not right, but they won't accept it. And do you know where the eureka, the best moment is? And I say this to the chefs, especially when we get down to the final 5s and 6s, 5 and 6 chefs, whatever, is you have no idea what you've done until you sit and see yourself on the television. If you think about it, these chefs don't know where they're going or work in some pretty normal kitchens. And 1 month or 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, they turn the telly on and they see themselves cooking. They see the way they speak. They look at they hear what the judges are saying. You get to see their family reaction. They've got their loved ones around them. That'll be the proudest moment. Even in failure, they feel incredibly proud. And that's a life-changing experience for those chefs that enter one of the toughest competitions in cookery. And I admire that. But it's always the bit when they see themselves, that's where they learn the most about who they are. When you have a look at what you do. Brilliant.
Very good. We always end with some quick fire questions. And the first one is your 3 non-negotiables. And these may well be very different to what you would have said 20 years ago. Your 3 non-negotiables that you and the people around you need to buy into.
I'm not going to change. I am what I am. Don't ask me to stop work. Oh, that's a tough question. I don't think I've got a third. I don't think I can answer that.
Those 2 are strong.
What advice would you give to a teenage Marcus in Southport just starting out?
Don't change.
How important is legacy to you?
Only to my family.
Not to you.
I've not thought about me. I only care about what my family think of me.
If you could go back to one moment in your life, what would it be and why?
One moment. I think it's a tough, and again another very difficult question. One moment in my life, there's lots. I think I'd go back to almost starting high school and just ask the question to the teachers as to why you let so many people like me slip through the net. Because as I look back, I think there's so many young people out there in the world, in our country, that miss out on proper school, proper education, and they just go through the net. And I think education is one of the most important things. It's something that I never ever let my children feel that they can slip through any net. It's not going to happen. And I wish I could go back and change that, because I think education is so important. And I feel that I didn't get that.
Very good. I'd like to know what lesson from everything that you've done and all the experiences you've had, what are the lessons that you're passing on to your children at this stage?
Never look back in regret. Never look back and wish, I wish I tried a bit harder at that exam, or I wish I tried harder at the football pitch. Your position as a young person for me is really important. That whatever you do, whatever you're in, make sure you stand out from the crowd. And I'm very open with my kids. When we sat around the dinner table, it's Mum, Dad, Jake, Arch, Jesse. There's not a TV personality. Yeah. There's not a head chef. Not an author. It's just Dad having a conversation. And I've got more in my arsenal of experience than my children, and I'd like to think that they will take on board and listen to what I've got to say, because there's one thing in life you cannot buy, and that's experience. You have to live it, and that's the one thing I say to them all of the time. Never ever turn around at the end of something and think, I wish. No chance.
One of our favourite phrases on the podcast, Marcus, is about world-class basics. It's what Sir Ian McGeechan said created a test match animal. What are your own world-class basics?
I think I can't help but go back to the basics, my family value, my father's family value, which is just work and give it everything. You know, when I was doing my exams at catering college, I left school with nothing. I stepped into the world of catering in a kitchen, water off a duck's back. Classroom, something completely different. I used to go home every afternoon when I was at catering college, and I'd study and study and study and study. I learned everything that I needed to know. But for every 30 minutes that someone else was doing research, I would do 3 hours. And there used to be a room my old bedroom. I used to be in with my brother. And when he left, they turned it into like a little study area with a sofa in it. I used to sit up there for like 3 hours every night, just learning and learning and learning. And I came top in every exam I ever did. From being nothing at school to top and winning competitions in theory, told me that you can do anything if you put your mind to it. And that's what I had to do. Do you know what? If I've got to spend a little bit more time focusing on something more than the next person next to me, it's fine. I'll get there. Trust me.
And your final message for people that are listening to this or watching it on YouTube is your one golden rule to living a high-performance life. I suppose in many ways, what's the final message you'd like to leave ringing in the ears of the people that have tuned into this episode?
I think you have to be reflective of what you want in life and set the goals that you know that you can reach, that you know you're going to have to work hard to get to. I think it's really important that you don't dream too much and that you have to be realistic about your own individual capabilities, and do not be distracted by one of the biggest distractions that we all have. It's in our hands, it's called an iPhone. That is the dangerous thing to have, because that thing there shows you more than you need to know, and it's the biggest distraction. And I think we have to be very careful that you need to stay focused on you as an individual and focus on your own goals and stop worrying about what everyone else is doing.
Thank you very much, man. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Well done.
Brilliant.
Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, leave a review, but somehow get involved with the High Performance Podcast and become part of our growing community. Thanks for being part of the adventure.